virus, that our states are opening up and people are getting shots. So we're doing better. I'm glad to be with you. We've come to the 40th chapter of Genesis. And in the 41st chapter, we're going to read about 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. This led me to do a little bit of reading about the Nile River. I want to share a little bit of what I found out because I think it bears on what's taking place in the book of Genesis. I didn't know that the Nile River was one of the longest rivers in the world. If you've ever watched that movie on television, The African Queen, with Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn, I hope I got that right. They're going down a river in World War I to a lake where they're going to sink a German ship. That lake is Lake Victoria, and it lies on the equator in the heart of Africa, and that's the source of the Nile River. And the Nile River is one of the few rivers in the world that flows from the south to the north. And this messes me up with my thinking. Lower Egypt is that part of Egypt down next to the Mediterranean Sea, while Upper Egypt is further back up in the interior of Africa. Now, the branch of the Nile that comes out of Lake Victoria is called the White Nile. Why, I don't know. And this is going to be a guess. The city of Khartoum, and I'm guessing it's about halfway in the length of the Nile. You can look on the map, and I may be off 1,000 miles. The Nile is 4,000 miles long. The Blue Nile starts in the northeast part of Africa, way up in the corner in Ethiopia. It was Abyssinia at one time. And if the map shows the mountain range, it's a rough mountainous area. And every year, about June to September, there's a rainy season in Ethiopia. And it washes down a lot of sediment from these mountains into the Blue Nile, and the Blue Nile flows into the White Nile, and this is what causes the Nile River to flood and leave the deposits of sediment, which enriches the soil and makes Egypt one of the richest grain-producing countries of the ancient world. Now, Egypt proper is probably 900,000 miles from the Mediterranean Sea to the southern border. There have been two capitals at least. Cairo is the modern city down just south of the delta where the Nile splits, and if you look on the map, all the different streams. Between Cairo and that delta area, there was the city of On, or Heliopolis, in Bible days, the city of the sun. That was one of the capitals of the religious part. Just south of Cairo, maybe 2 or 3 miles, the capital city of Memphis in Bible times. Now, Memphis, about all evidence is gone because they got the stones and built Cairo with it. The burials take place on the west bank of the Nile River where the sun goes down. About 2500 BC, the first pyramid was built, the step pyramid. They come up so far, then stepped in and built another one, up another one. Saqqara is where the step pyramid is. That was the first one. Shortly after that, they moved down across the river from Cairo and built those 3 pyramids of Giza, the Great Pyramid, the second pyramid just a little bit smaller, and then there was a smaller pyramid. Now, I've been in the Great Pyramid and that middle-sized pyramid, and they're different inside, but it's interesting to go in there. These pyramids were old when Abraham and Joseph went into Egypt. Been there for years. in the 1800s or early, maybe it's earlier than that, one of the kings in Cairo decided to tear the Great Pyramid down and use the stones to build houses. I think they tore maybe 20 foot off the top of it, and it's 480 foot tall, and it was such a job they just threw up their hands. So that Great Pyramid is just about indestructible today. Now, if the rains in Ethiopia fail, the Nile does not overflow, the silt does not get on the ground, and the crop fails. That's what happened during the years of famine. The Blue Nile did not have its overflow, its flood, and that's what took place. Now, coming to the 40th chapter, I thought of the book of James. I want to read just 2 or 3 verses from the opening chapter of the book of James. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into divers temptations, knowing this, that the trial of your faith worketh patience. Let patience have her perfect work, that ye may be perfect and entire, lacking nothing. This 40th chapter is about patience. Joseph's brothers were jealous of him. They hated him, and they sold him into slavery. He was bought by an officer of Pharaoh called Potiphar, who was the captain of the guard. That's important because when he's put in prison, the captain of the guard is going to be over the prison. So it is believed that Potiphar not only had Joseph as a household slave, but when he put him in prison, Potiphar was still the voice that was over him. Because Potiphar's wife falsely accused Joseph, he was thrown into prison rather than being put to death, and this would indicate that Potiphar had a question mark in his mind about the guilt of Joseph. And he knew that Joseph was a good man and a smart man, for he had put him over all of his household. So Potiphar didn't put Joseph to death, but put him in the king's prison. Now that's where we pick up with the 40th chapter. It came to pass, I don't know whether you've noticed or not, but several times, back over in chapter 39, verse 13, it came to pass in this 40th chapter, down in verse 20, and it came to pass. These words are used several times, and each time it is indicative that a period of time has slipped by. How much? We don't know. Just a good bit of time has come to pass. It came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. Now, in one of the translations, it says the captain of the butlers and the captain of the bakers. That doesn't tell the whole story. The word that's used for this butler is the cupbearer. And the cupbearer was one of the most important men in Pharaoh's kingdom, for it was his responsibility to check everything that the Pharaoh was going to drink, lest it be poisoned. Nehemiah was the cupbearer of Artaxerxes in the Persian Empire, and that Rabshakeh, who was with the Babylonians, I believe he was the cupbearer of Nebuchadnezzar. This was a very important position. The chief baker was over all the cooking. These two men are responsible for what Pharaoh eats and drinks. Now, in passing, Poppaea, the mother of Nero, married Emperor Claudius in the Roman Empire, and she poisoned Claudius so Nero could become the emperor of the Roman Empire. So poisonings were something that happened pretty well, regular enough that they had a cupbearer and a chief baker to keep check. We don't know why these two men were put in prison, but I would guess that it had something to do with their food. Pharaoh may have just got a bad case of indigestion, and was afraid that he had been poisoned and put him in prison. Or it may be that he was something come up that there was actually an effort to poison Pharaoh. But these two men were put in prison. And Pharaoh was angry with two of his officers against the chief of the butlers and against the chief of the bakers. There it is. And he put them in prison in the house of the captain of the guard. Now, if you look back in the 39th chapter and the first verse, Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard. I believe that Potiphar was in charge of the prison as well as being Joseph's owner when he bought it. And when he put Joseph in prison, he put him in the prison that he was over. Now, I suspect that he had another officer who was under him that did the immediate overseeing of the prison. But Potiphar had the final say in it. Put them in prison in the house of the captain of the guard, into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. The 105th Psalm says that they hurt his feet with fetters, and they put him in iron. And in the New Testament, the 7th chapter of Acts, Stephen talked about that the Lord was with him in all of his afflictions. We don't know what all they did to Joseph, but it wasn't a picnic when they put him in prison. But they didn't kill him. And after he had been in prison, going back a little bit, the man that was in charge of it come to trust him, and they put Joseph in charge of he was a trustee, but nevertheless he won their confidence, and he became one of the men that took care of the prison. Verse 4. The captain of the guard charged Joseph with them. The captain of the bakers and the captain of the butlers was put in Joseph's charge. Now, it didn't mean that Joseph was to be their boss. It meant that Joseph was to take care of them. These were important men, and Joseph was just a slave, a prisoner. So these men were to be taken care of until their case was heard and the judgment was given. So they give Joseph that responsibility. He served them, and they continued a season in prison. And they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night. Now that's interesting. Both of them had dreams the same night, and something about these dreams got their attention. It was more than just an ordinary dream. Now you remember the first verse of the book of Hebrews, God who at sundry times and in divers manners spake unto the fathers in time past. They didn't have a written Bible in Joseph's day. God sometimes appeared in a human form and talked face to face with people. Sometimes, many times through the Old Testament, God spoke to people through dreams. Now, He has said His final and complete word in His Son, Jesus. That's what Hebrews says. So we don't look for visions. Now, God is still able to give a vision. God is still able to speak through a dream. But God is speaking through His Word tonight. These two men had dreams the same night. And Joseph came in unto them in the morning and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. Something about their facial appearance, their countenance. And he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in the prison of his Lord's house, saying, Wherefore look ye sad today? And they said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you. Outside of prison, there were all kinds of wise men and soothsayers and dream interpreters. If these men had been free, they would have looked up one of these wise men and got them to interpret the dream. I read somewhere where they have found on the... Now, they buried the kings in the pyramids for a while. But a great big pyramid sitting out there with a king in it, gold heaped up all around him. They broke into every one of those pyramids and stole the riches out of them. So they changed their procedure. They went 450 miles up the Nile River to a place called Thebes, another capital. And over on the west bank, they took laborers and they cut huge palaces underground out of the stone, room after room, and they painted the walls of it. The story of daily life in Egypt can be read from the walls of those tombs. Now, I don't know how many tombs there are up there. I saw on the news this past week they were moving the mummies out of the museum, the National Museum in Cairo, into a special building that has recently been built. Now, I have been in the mummy room in the museum in Egypt. Row after row in glass cases, the ancient kings and queens of Egypt. And you can walk by. Ramses II stands out the most vivid in my memory, for he was one of the most powerful pharaohs that lived. Let me say one other thing, too, in the news this past week. Ethiopia is in the process of building a dam across the Blue Nile, and Egypt is threatening to do something drastic if they cut the flow of the Blue Nile so that Egypt suffers. Awful touchy stuff in the Middle East when you go to do something or other. Well, be that as it may. These men are in the prison. They can't go to a dream interpreter, and they don't know what to do about it. And Joseph tells them that God is the one who can interpret dreams. Only God knows what's going to happen tomorrow. Now, dream interpreters, and they found the books of the dreams on the walls of the tombs that told them if it's a cat or an ox or whatever, this is what it means. But these men don't have access to that. But God is the one who can tell what dreams mean. I don't know whether they knew the God that Joseph was talking about. But before he gets through, surely they're going to have respect for the God of this Hebrew boy. The chief butler told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "In my dream, behold, a vine was before me, a grapevine. And in the vine were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded and blossomed and shot forth, and the clusters thereof brought forth ripe grapes." Just all at once. "And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said unto him," this is the interpretation, for Joseph was counting on God to reveal to him the meaning of the dream. Joseph has only had 2 dreams before this, back when he was a teenager, about the sheaves and the stars bowing down to him. Nothing else has been said about these things, but he's hanging on to those dreams. That's what's caused him to bear up. This is where patience comes in. He's waiting, believing that God is faithful and that God will honor those dreams somewhere. Doesn't know how nor why nor when, but he is. Verse 12, Joseph said unto him, this is the interpretation of it, the 3 branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head and restore thee unto thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand after the former manner when thou wast his butler. He's going to get out, be reinstated, and continue to be Pharaoh's cupbearer. Now, because he was Pharaoh's cupbearer, not so much officially, but because he was by Pharaoh's side daily, he had a lot of influence with Pharaoh. Nehemiah had a lot of influence with Artaxerxes. So the cupbearer was a very important position. Joseph continues. But think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness. I pray thee unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. How long has he been there? We're not told, but surely he's been there a year or more, for it would take that much time for him to earn the confidence of the man that's in charge of the prison. Maybe he's been there 2 years or 3 years. He's been there a while. From the time he was sold until the time he comes out of prison and appears before Pharaoh, we're going to be told, he was 30 years old, 17 to 30 years, 13 years he's been there. How many years he was a slave in Potiphar's house, we're not told. How many years he was in prison, we're not told. But he was there more than any 2 or 3 years. He's asking the butler, you're going to get out, you're going to be free. Say a good word for me when you get to Pharaoh. Indeed, I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and there have I not done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. When the interpretation of the butler's dream was good, the baker decided he wanted Joseph to tell him his dream, and that's what he's doing. 3 baskets. Verse 17. And in the uppermost basket there were all manner of foods for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. And Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee, and shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off of thee. Bad message. But Joseph's not responsible for it. His job was to tell him what the message was. And that's what the preacher's job is. We're not the originator of the message. We're simply the mouthpiece. The Bible talks about hell. This is not the preacher's manufacture. This is what God has said. So the preacher doesn't make the message, he brings the message. And it came to pass, verse 20, the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday. There's 2 birthdays mentioned in the Bible. This one of Pharaoh, and in the New Testament, Herod Agrippa had a birthday. You remember what he did on his birthday? Salome danced, and he promised to give her anything she wanted unto half of his kingdom, and her mother got her to ask for the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And that's what he gave her. So birthdays are not really important in the Bible. Came to pass the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he made a feast unto all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief butler unto his butlership again, and he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them, and yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him. How tragic. How inconsiderate. But God had a hand in this. When I read, let patience have her perfect work. The trial of your faith worketh patience. The commentators accused Joseph of being a young man full of pride and sort of strutting around his brothers. Now, whether he did that or not, you make up your mind. I'm not convinced that that's what happened. But whatever it was, by now, he's been cut down to size. And he realizes that he's just a human being and that God is in control. So, Joseph has got to have patience. And I'll hush in just a minute. Verse 1 of chapter 41. It came to pass at the end of 2 full years. What do you suppose Joseph did during those 2 full years? He's still in the prison, wondering, but he's still believing that God will take care of him. Not easy. He's learning patience. Behold, there, after 2 full years, that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. Behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored cows, and fat-fleshed, big, fat, healthy cows. And they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed. Skinny, looked like he's going to fall over any minute. And stood by the other cows upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed cows did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat cows, so Pharaoh awoke. One of the Greek writers said that the Nile gave the world Egypt. The Nile Valley is from about 2 miles to 6 miles. It averages 6 miles wide. A place or two, it goes out to 12 miles. But when you go to Egypt, you can almost literally stand with one foot where it's green grass and the other foot where it's desolate, barren sand. Just as far as the water reaches, that's how far the vegetation goes. Now, even in Bible days, they had learned to make pools and cut irrigation ditches and reserve some of that water to water their crops along during the dry season. But nevertheless, they still depended on that overflow every year with that sediment, which was rich topsoil for the fertilizer. And that's been going on for 5,000 years at least. The Egyptians worshipped the Nile. They believed that the Nile was a god. Later in the book of Exodus, when Moses causes the waters of the Nile to turn to blood, that's a direct strike at Egypt's god. They didn't just have the Nile, they had a lot of gods. The Pharaoh woke up because the Nile was doing this. But he slept and dreamed the second time, and behold, 7 ears of grain came up on one stalk. It says 7 ears of corn. They didn't have maize, the corn that we have. It was wheat or barley. This was the corn of the Bible days. And on this stalk of wheat, there were 7 limbs, and every one had a big head on it. Always well fleshed out. And behold, 7 thin ears and blighted with the east wind sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 fat and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt, all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. If they told him this is what the dream means, and that wasn't so, they'd lose their job and maybe their life. So they couldn't tell Pharaoh what these dreams meant. All the wise men were sought out. Then spoke the chief butler down in verse 9 unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Now some have said that it was the fault that he had done to Pharaoh, but I think it was the fault that he had done to Joseph, in that he had failed to say anything to Pharaoh about Joseph. Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in prison in the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream in one night, I and he. We dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was there with us a young man, an Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams, to each man according to his dream he did interpret. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was. Me he restored unto mine office, and him he hanged. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, And they brought him hastily out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself, changed his raiment, and came in unto Pharaoh. If the butler had have remembered Joseph, spoke to Pharaoh about it, and Pharaoh had given him a pardon, and Joseph had got out of prison, reckon where he would have been on this day. God has a hand on the whole affair. They know exactly where Joseph, and it's time when God's going to fulfill the promises He's made to Pharaoh. Now the same thing applies. Another thing I read somewhere this past week, I don't remember whether it was Gallup or who it was that made this religious survey of the United States recently. Only 47% of our nation claims any religious affiliation. The first time in the history of this country that a minority claims a relationship with God. 53% tonight has no place for the church in their lives. We're in trouble. But Pharaoh knew where to go for Joseph, and the time has gone, and I'm going to pick up with Joseph coming. But the fact that they brought him out of the prison, and he shaved, in all of the pictures on the tomb walls and everything, the Egyptians believed in cleanliness, extreme cleanliness. The men shaved every hair on their body. They would then wear a wig, if it was necessary, and a false beard, but they would shave all the real hair off. They did that to Joseph, and they put on him clean linen garments. For they have brought him out of prison, they have dressed him to stand before Pharaoh. Now I'll hush and pick up with what happens at this point next week. Any comment before I shut down? Brother Craig.
Thanks, Brother Eldridge. Sorry we're too busy to make this meeting in a couple weeks. Next week we won't do it too, I hope. Prayer list tonight: Margie Johnson, Jimmy and Sandy, Wendell and Lisa Seals. Last thing I heard from Lisa is, probably, I don't know how much of it, Wendell's been in the hospital, for several days. And he's been sedated and on a ventilator. And at one time, his oxygen was 30% on the ventilator. And they started weaning him off of it. And they're hoping that maybe tomorrow he can come off the ventilator. So anyway, so that's where he's at. And so remember them. Mary Wood, Alice Roper, Michael Joe Wood, the Longston family, Clint Criscoe, Chris and Myra Basil, Peggy Thompson, Tina Thompson, Kenneth and Lana Scott, Jacob Lamb, Tim Davidson, Mary Faith Graham, Bobby Scott, James Ray, Miss Evie Lee, James and Julius Taylor, Iris Fowler, Bobby Moore, Kenneth Frazier, Levon and Betty Hall, Brother Pat and Miss Betty Mackin and their family, Charlotte Hardy, Sam Thomas, Kay Edmondson, Harold Johnson, Andy Brown, Clark Johnston, James Childers, Bill Newland and family, Max Sessions and family, Lisa Saint, her neck, Nikki Champion, cancer, James Taylor, Julius Taylor, unspoken, Seals family again, unspoken, J.W. Brown, the Griffin family, Clint Criscoe, and Ann Criscoe. Any others?
I got a call from Vanderbilt to determine if he is a candidate for kidney.
Okay, any other?
Gail Manley's having surgery, I think it's the 15th.
Gail Manley?
They're putting a cochlear implant in one of her ears.
Okay.
The other one, she can still use a hearing aid, but the other one's bad enough, they're gonna put the cochlear in.
Okay. Any other? Okay. Roger, will you dismiss us, please?
Dear Heavenly Father, we just come to you today, Lord, thanking you for this beautiful day you've given us, Lord. Now, Lord, you've heard these prayer requests, just to continue to touch your body. Be with Wendell and Lisa as she goes through this time, just comfort her and her, Lord. Lord, be with Jimmy and Sandy and all the rest, Lord. And be with Gail as she has this surgery, Lord. And Lord, just forgive me the way I failed you, right now. Amen.
Amen. Be blessed, our brothers and sisters. Be blessed.